Hello, everybody. This is the 164th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those of you watching on video, you'll see that we have a guest. Lisa Fathers is with us this morning. Hello, Lisa.
Morning.
Hello. We'll come to you in a minute just to give a little introduction for those people who don't know you. But I know you're fairly well known in the education world. But we'll come to Stan, who I think has got a cold this morning.
Yeah, another grandchild transmitted
I know.
illness.
When they're born and everything looks great, doesn't it, Stan? But then you're not conscious of the fact that they're bringing these germs and
Yeah,
diseases.
been in nursery 3 weeks, and we've already had two fairly serious viruses.
Oh,
But yeah, other than that, fine.
okay, well, that's great. Yeah. So anyway, Lisa, who are you and how do we know each other?
So, I am Director of Education and Partnerships at Bright Futures, which means that I work in our executive team very closely with my CEO, driving school improvement, but also overseeing our many hubs, teaching school hubs, maths hubs, early years hub, and our big multi-site skit. Really passionate about children and young people. I think we know each other because of some of our work in Blackpool, but also I think you know my colleague John Stevens, don't you?
Yeah,
Really well.
yeah, I know
Yeah.
John from I inspect. Well, I was responsible for local authority inspections for Ofsted, and as part of that, I went to quality assure the inspection at Salford, where I think John was director of education or deputy director. I can't remember what it was now, but that goes
That's
back
right.
a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah. I think we've got some other connections as well in that I've got some really good relationships with the colleagues in the MAP that you used to be in.
Oh, right. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's difficult to describe really what's been going on in the world this week. For those of you, if you're looking at this back, perhaps a few months down the line, there's been a major outbreak of hostilities between Israel and those living in the Gaza Strip, and it's dreadful to see what's been going on. But we may venture onto that in terms of the impact on young people and children as part of the discussion. But we do try and avoid those sorts of political discussions because I think we were saying before, the history of it is very, very complicated and not
It
easy.
is.
I think you were saying, Lisa, that's a challenge for perhaps teachers at the moment managing questions from children.
Yeah, I think any war going on in any country is really challenging for teachers to manage because you have to balance off, making sure that you know and you understand some of the histories that lie behind whatever conflict is going on, but also thinking about the health and well-being of the children that are in the class and helping them, view the news objectively and finding ways sometimes to make really complex, very long, convoluted historical wars a bit easier for everybody to understand.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a push from media and social media to take sides on these things, that you have to be on one side or the other. And the fact is you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You don't have to do that. You can look
no.
at it objectively.
Yeah. Well, Stan, what's caught your eye this week apart from that?
Um, Apart from having a cold and blah blah blah, just a quick look at the Labour Party speeches, which didn't really grab education very much. I was a bit disappointed in that at one point it was going to be education was the key to get everything right again, and actually in Keir Starmer's speech it was very, very light on education, but I didn't see the shadow secretary's speech, but I have read it, and the thing that caught my eye was a reference to changing Ofsted, and also in the same sentence, annual inspections of things that matter. Now, in the context of that, there was a lot of talk about maths and creating the maths equivalent of phonics. I'm not quite sure how that fits together, but I'll go with it for the moment. But an annual inspection seemed to me something that sounds like a good idea, but actually, when you start to look at what that would mean in terms of the number of inspectors you would have to have, and what's important is a very subjective issue. So I suspect what it's actually going to be is an annual audit of safeguarding. I think that's what it'll boil down to, and not necessarily organised through Ofsted. But it was, it was linked to a change with Ofsted, and we've just got a new head of Ofsted. So that'll be interesting to see what side of the fence he sits on.
Yeah.
It will.
It was a shame, really. I mean, the conference speech was on the last morning of the conference. That speech, and I did see it and read it, and actually, there are lots of sound bites in there, and that's the point that you make. About the devil's in the detail with all of this, isn't it? But actually, I think that
it didn't feel like the education that Tony Blair brought in.
I think the maths one was quite interesting. I mean, I don't think any of us would disagree that additional funding to improve maths, that obviously that would be really helpful. And I actually quite like the focus on that idea of real world maths, financial literacy. But I think we need to make sure that we recognise and harness the work that Maths Hub have already done in this space already. There's the new National Professional Qualification that is about leadership of primary maths. So there is some recognition already that is an area of workforce development. I think you were right. That was a little bit of a hint around whether or not there might be something mandatory, similar to the phonics approach. So I guess we'll wait and see, won't we?
Yeah.
I've always, when it gets to life maths, I always think of Mick Waters. And he used to describe, the kind of lessons that teachers tried to do to make them practical. Like you're at the garage, petrol costs this much a litre, you're going to buy this many litres. And then he stops and says, nobody buys petrol like that. The only maths involved in getting petrol is trying to remember the number of the pump when you walk by.
But actually,
you can't even always do that.
Yeah. I was talking to my wife about this after the speech, and but I think there are some real sort of important elements here. That I went to a little sort of cake shop in Cheadle about a year ago, and there were two very young assistants behind the counter, and unfortunately the card machine had broken. And so I think they were about 17, these two, and the owner had gone off to somewhere, I don't know, but said, oh, I'm only going to be 10 minutes. But at that time, the machine broke and we were wanting to pay. So I took my card and the card wouldn't work. So I then had to use cash. And I have to say, those young people couldn't handle the handling of actual cash. And it was only a sort of like, I think it was £11.50, and I gave £20. And I ended up having to go to the till and showing them how to use the cash. So in a way, I know that cash is perhaps not as important as it used to be, but in a way, that's a good example of how young people have gone through their education and actually haven't really received the sort of practical day-to-day skills that they need in order to survive in society. Might have got their GCSE grade 4.
Yeah.
We had one, Frank, in the rugby stadium at Salford, where they'd done all the new pricing, and a pint of beer was £5.50, but half a beer was £2.50. So you could get two halves cheaper than a pint. So there were three of us, and we ordered 6 halves in 3 pints.
But I want to credit, the fact that there was this attention on trying to make maths a little bit more relevant. I suppose at the end of the day, that's at the heart of this. That probably do need to look at what is it we're teaching young people. Because I'm a great advocate for digital education as well. And it's heartbreaking when you see very talented young people going into work and have never been taught how to use an Excel spreadsheet, and that's a fundamental part of just a fundamental part of that job. And suddenly they're on the back foot, and people thinking, "Oh God, what do they teach them in schools these days?" Which I think is an entirely valid thing for an employer to say about that. So
I think the estimate bit in maths is really important for things like shopping. That you can't be in your head adding up everything you've bought in the shop, but you can have a view that it should be roundabout £15 or
Mm.
Hang on.
Although with the cost of living crisis
Yeah,
these days, your estimate is always lower, isn't it?
I
Than what
was
it
just about
actually
to
ends up
say that.
being.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right, Lisa. Yeah. Anyway, well, that's a good start, wasn't it? Wow. Lisa, what's caught your eye this week?
Two things actually. So I really liked the kind of celebrity push and endorsement of the youth mental health campaign this week. Hashtag Get Britain Talking, and Anton Deck really encouraging parents to get the children to talk about their worries, because we don't routinely do that. And if you're a busy parent, actually sometimes you only find out if something's worrying your child if you happen to go on a walk with them at weekend. And I think it's really important that we role model talking about our own worries, so that we give permission to our children to do the same. So I think that's caught my eye. The second thing that caught my eye was Lisa Nandy's very powerful speech about the need to embolden and empower women, and actually the statistic that in 2023 130 million girls still don't have access to education. I mentioned this as my daughter was going out to college this morning, and she was furious about that, and saying, gosh, that's so terrible, what can we do to help? It's outrageous, isn't it? And when you think about the problem that we have in education around teacher retention, teacher recruitment, a leadership pipeline, part of that solution is women, and keeping women in the profession and finding flexible ways for women to stay in the profession as well. And we're just missing a trick, aren't we? 25% of women in Parliament. I mean, it's 2023.
And I mean, it's interesting. We had a guest on a few weeks ago, Rebecca Lawton, who is a CEO of a there's about 70 settings in her trust, but most independent special schools, but they're going to a 4-day week.
Right.
Basically because of the problems about recruitment. So the pressure they're having. There were some figures out recently that the biggest problem is the loss of female staff in their late 30s, early 40s.
That's right.
Just at the point when they're probably the most informed, and they've had a lot of investment in them.
Yeah.
But they're not. I don't think they're leaving primarily because of issues in the classroom. It's just balancing the demands of work and life in family commitments. It
is because research would suggest that despite the modern day parenting, a lot of that responsibility still falls on the mum if it's a mum and dad type family. And I think as well that we're missing a lot of potential leaders because of the menopause as well, if we're honest, because there's a lack of understanding about the impact of that on ladies in their the 40s and the 50s.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one thing, we're not making a political statement here, but going back really to try and bring something you said about Lisa Nandy.
Yeah.
And, about a year ago, I was fortunate to share a platform with Lisa Nandy at a conference in the Midlands, and by gum, she's really, really good speaker.
She is,
really off the cuff, very, very sort of passionate and very clear about bringing her background into her decision making. But then, of course, she was allegedly, I'm not sure if this is true, but suggested that she was demoted, in a recent shake-up of that of the Labour Party. But actually, I want to sort of bring the point back to, well, here, if that is the case, isn't it remarkable how she's not taken the huff, or she may have, but professionally she's just maintained that, well, I'm in the team. My job is to improve this for the team. It's not about me.
No. And actually, that is a really important leadership lesson in schools, isn't it? That you have to be united behind decisions. When you go out of that leadership meeting, whatever has happened in that office, it's a united front.
Yeah.
We've all sat there like that after a meeting.
We have.
Just hope nobody asked me about that decision. No, I mean, it's that sort of corporate nature, isn't it? And the word corporate is actually unfortunate, really, isn't it? Because it sort of has that sort of businessy thing about it. But actually, we've all been involved in the decision making, and actually, I suppose at the time there are occasions when you think, well, if the decisions are not all going your way, you don't feel comfortable about it. Well, no one's forcing you to stay here, are they?
That's it. That's it. And actually, I think that we do need to reclaim the word corporate in education, because we are running businesses, and our business might be teaching and learning and it might be children, but we do have to think in a much more value for money type way, I think.
Yeah. Well, actually, that wasn't my point. I'm going to keep my one for later, but there was a problem, wasn't there, about the allocation of funding for schools,
Oh
which
yeah.
um,
Quite a big
apparently,
problem.
yeah, was identified before the Conservative Party conference, but was delayed until after the conference was finished. And in some respects, you can see it as well. I understand the reason why you wouldn't perhaps want to reveal that, but because of the it may deflect from the messages you wanted to give at the conference. But that delay meant that schools were thinking that they had sufficient
Yeah.
funds for their financial planning, and then actually we were telling them perhaps 2 or 3 weeks later than we needed to, that actually, we've got a problem. And for me, when I worked in the co-op, I've said this many times on here: if you've got some bad news, get it out, and get it out all
Yeah.
in one go. Get it out as soon as you know.
Yeah.
People will respect you for the fact that they haven't found out. You've told them,
That's it.
and
You're getting in front of
you're in
it.
charge of that agenda item. You might lose it eventually. People will huff and puff and say that's terrible, which of course it is, but at least you've got the honesty aspect. The
Yeah.
transparency rests with you, whereas now you think, well, what else is there?
Yeah.
Say that, but so I think and that's important. I think bring it back to education, that's where good leadership sits.
It does. It does. It does. Yeah. It's about honesty, and it's about owning it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you own it, you can mitigate that.
Yeah.
If you're upfront with it, you can say, this is the issue, and this is what I've already planned to mitigate some of the impact of it, rather
That's
than
right.
keeping quiet and letting it hit the
Yeah.
fan.
Yeah.
You can take control of the narrative. I mean, I don't think it's contentious to say that there are lots of areas I think government perhaps could do better in terms of communication strategy. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Let's not be too specific at that point.
Exactly.
It's easy for us to be specific, but I don't want you to get drawn into.
How do they end up tying themselves in knots over things that were very easy to state at the beginning? Either, look, we've got this wrong, or yes, this is something we intend to do. We weren't going to release it because, I mean, no decision's been made.
I personally think that this government have got themselves into a position where they don't like to admit they've got anything wrong. And in a way, I think leaders, in my experience of effective leadership in the areas of civil service or in the area of schooling, I've always felt really more comfortable with leaders who come in and say, well, that didn't go very well, did it? I mean, that sense of honesty,
It's
I lend
humble
myself to
leadership.
that.
Yeah. I think the other bit about it that we're into now, which probably is to do with social media, is you've got to be seen to be following the line to the letter. And in some cases where there have been errors in the position we're taking, it leaves people in ridiculous situations trying to justify something that by the time they're in front of the cameras justifying it, it's been proved that it's the wrong decision, it's the wrong way to go. And yet we still stick to the line. And I just think when you talk integrity, I think we need some politicians on all sides that say, actually, no, this isn't the right thing that we're doing. We're going to change.
Yeah.
Do something different.
Yeah.
It's as if, I mean, particularly, we were talking before about the issues that are happening in Gaza at the moment. I mean, everybody, including the Israelis, have been taken completely off guard. So suddenly, we've got Grant Shapps on television this morning. I mean, unable really to answer some very direct, straight questions, but actually, he's probably trying to get to grips with what the hell is our line on this. So I think it'd be easier to just say, wouldn't it, as a leader would in a school. I don't know enough about it at the moment.
That's it.
I'm working flat out to get my head around this, And I think people.
Well, that's my point, Frank. Because I think what they do is they try then to link to the party line or the government line or in a school it'd be the corporate line. Well, at a time when it's not possible to continue to do that, and instead of saying something simple like, "Look, give me some time to look into it," you know, the situation's changing by the hour. We may have a different viewpoint when we've got more information later in the day. And just instead of
I
sticking
think
to
you're right.
a line.
If you take it back to a school setting, which is what I feel more comfortable talking about,
We do as well.
yeah, actually, you know, let's think about something with a set of parents. It takes the heat out of it if you say to a set of parents, we may have got this wrong. We're human too. We're going to work to understand the situation better. If we have got it wrong, we'll address that and we'll learn from it and let's work together. And parents then think, oh, well, you know, what more can you ask for except a little bit of humble, authentic honesty?
Yeah.
I think the ones the parents I used to get most surprised from was when you turn to them and say, yes, you're right.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, no, I'm come here for an argument with you.
That balloon burst very quickly there, didn't it, Stan?
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, what caught my eye? Well, actually, you prompted it this morning with a tweet. So Lisa was tweeting about, just mentioned about making sure children brush their teeth. I think in your family, was that this morning?
Yeah. So my son is an absolute devil for putting his toothbrush underneath the water and then saying he's brushed his teeth. Yeah.
Oh dear.
We have to stand on guard.
Yeah. I think that's probably shared by many other parents, isn't it? I mean, it's not just in the father's household, but anyway, the thing for us for me was around this bit of an outcry about brushing teeth, making sure that children brush teeth, and I think that this is again what is the message here? I think the message is it's really important that children brush their teeth, and if they don't brush their teeth at home, we ought to do everything we can to make sure parents and carers monitor that and encourage it. But similarly, if they don't, then actually, I think there is something that schools need to do to stress how important it is. And if that means that some children don't know how to brush their teeth, we tell them how to brush their teeth. But that doesn't mean to say, I don't think in my head I've got a vision, at least I hope I haven't, of year ones all with a toothbrush, all having their annual lesson on how to brush their teeth. I don't see it in that way. Do you two see it in that way?
No, it'd be like your pencil case, wouldn't it? Have you got your pens, your pencils, your ruler, and your toothbrush?
But it made me think though about there was some brilliant work, and actually some of the opportunity areas, even though they're no more, they're still working. So I was at an event last week, which is basically around the opportunity area, and people who were working in the opportunity area are still connected with each other. And so we were doing work in Blackpool about how we bring business and schools closer together. But in Bradford, during the opportunity area, they had this spectacles project, which basically meant that every child in reception in Bradford had their eyes tested in reception. And it highlighted a vast array of young children who had quite poor eyesight and needed to have wear glasses. And I cannot understand why that project is not offered to all children in reception or in early years, so that, a key thing about, can that child actually see the board? Can they see the book? Can they see the screen? It flushes all of that out. Now, whether there's the capacity in the in sort of being able to cope with that in terms of the referrals, I don't know. But we used to have school nurses that used to come round and do that sort of stuff. But
absolutely,
that's lost.
When I was a few years into my teaching career, I was in charge of PSHE, and I used to work so closely with the school nurse in Warrington. She was absolutely brilliant. She'd deliver some sessions. She'd deliver a lot of, some of the assemblies around puberty and things like that. And she was there for advice. She'd have a caseload as well. Bring back school nurses, absolutely. And you're right. We've lost a lot of capacity and expertise in the system.
Yeah,
I think as budgets have got tighter, because the question will be, whose responsibility is it? Is that health? Is it social? Is it education? And instead of somebody saying, well, it doesn't really matter whose responsibility it is, it needs to happen. It doesn't, because people, when they trim the budget, say, well, okay, we can't any longer be able to do school visits, so we'll cut that. And the school, as you get in the paper then, teachers should be doing this, and so teachers' workload then gets increased and increased in areas that they're not.
It's really hard, isn't it? Because what I see in some schools is mission creep, where actually they're so focused on the social stuff for all the right reasons, but there's almost been too much time thought about that and not enough time thought about the curriculum and outcomes and all that sort of stuff. There's got to be a balance, hasn't there?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, and just finally, that there's hearing as well. So we've got the teeth, we've got the sight, we've got the hearing. All of those things seem to me to be quite important aspects, I think, of a young child developing successfully and being given the chance to succeed. So I suppose, in a sense, just to sort of bring things to a close, I'm conscious of the fact that I sort of feel as though I'm sort of slightly out of the mainstream of life in schools. And when I do visit, I generally am impressed by what I see. It's very easy to be impressed when you're not in there all the time,
Yeah.
But I think that I'm just, having come out of that sort of 2-day conference last week, continue to be sort of optimistic about the future for education, primarily because we've still got very committed senior leaders running our schools. And I won't mention the name, but I was having a beer in a bar with a senior leader, and I was really struck by one thing. And this colleague was saying that they'd started to teach 4 lessons a week of mathematics, and they were aware of the fact that when they were doing time, the children couldn't read an analog clock face. So this teacher went and bought 30 watches with an analog dial and handed them out to the children. Now, they weren't, don't get me wrong, they're not Rolex watches, and hopefully they'll survive a week or two. But I thought, oh well, there's a person who really has not lost sight of why they're a teacher, and I thought, wow, that was just a little thing. The watches were 60p.
But, you know what? It's such an important life skill, isn't it? My dad's a retired maths teacher, and I have such a vivid memory of him teaching me how to tell the time. And I was the first person in my reception class as a child that could tell the time, and he was so proud of that. And actually, we've been quite remiss in our house and had to go back and say, hang on a minute, all we're looking at is digital clocks here. We need to do this. But you're absolutely right. It's fundamental.
Yeah. Well, okay, well, that's another week has rolled by. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have you, and we'd love to have you back.
Lovely. It's been nice to chat.
Yeah, no, it's a great start to the week for us. And and just with regard to Frankenstein Chats next week, we're doing a special spotlight on mental health on Monday, and we're not going to have a Frankenstein Chat broadcast next Friday. So we'll be issuing the broadcast we do on Monday on Friday, but then we're back again at the end of what is our half term. We've got Carolyn Eyre coming back, who is our sort of safeguarding guru. So she's going to talk about changes around keeping children safe, and also has got a view as to how Ofsted might actually involve themselves in that. So great couple of weeks coming up. Thank you, Lisa. Hope everybody has a great week. Thanks, Dan. Hope we see you without a cold next time. All right.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.